With the Super Bowl in the rearview window, all 32 teams have officially entered off-season mode, which means it's time for a mock draft. Rob and I are going to be dishing out dueling mock draft, 7 rounds of college prospect goodness coming your way here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s who are joining us, and glad as always to have my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, here on our Monday episode. Thanks to all of you who tune in and make Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week, whether you're in Forks, Washington, or Denver, Colorado. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you. It is officially the offseason now for all 32 teams after a, well, I guess not so thrilling Super Bowl last night in New Orleans. We are going to be dishing out a 7-round dueling set of mock drafts, round 1 all the way through round 7. We're really fired up about that and may have some commentary based on last night's game going into some of those selections that were made in this latest set of mock drafts that is brought your way courtesy of FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, let's get to the mock draft, a post-Super Bowl 7-round dueling mock draft. And look, Rob, before we even get into our picks, and I think you and I were expressing the same sentiment now that we both have seen each other's mock drafts right before starting this episode, unless you were under a rock, if you were watching that game last night, the Philadelphia Eagles just blew out the Kansas City Chiefs. No three-peat happening in this particular instance. It still never has happened in NFL history, and the Chiefs were not close. And the difference was the way that the line of scrimmage was not just controlled, but completely dominated by the Philadelphia Eagles. The Chiefs couldn't get pressure on Jalen Hurts. And on the other side, Patrick Mahomes, I've never seen that flustered in an NFL game in my life. Threw a pick 6, was happy feet all over the place. And it's because the Eagles just brought an onslaught. And oh, by the way, it was just with their front 4. It's not like they were blitzing. It was that front 4 that was getting after Patrick Mahomes. And so I think considering the trench play and just how much it was shown again that controlling the line of scrimmage is what championship football teams do, I would not be surprised if you and I decided to go a certain direction here with our first round pick at number 18 overall for the Seahawks.
Yeah, and you and I, for a long time, Corbin, even before the Super Bowl, of course, have long been proponents of winning along the line of scrimmage. As they said in the Fox telecast of the Super Bowl, the Philadelphia Eagles employ the biggest offensive line in all of the NFL. A lot of credit to, say, the Detroit Lions, for example, of being another team that has a very talented offensive line. And, you know, their success speaks for itself as well. But as you said, I mean, Philadelphia just bullied Kansas City at the line of scrimmage, and that's why the game wound up becoming the blowout that it was. I think along the offensive line, you just see the size, the ability to run block as well as pass protect a quarterback that could move his feet as well. Look, Jalen Hurts did a great job of throwing the ball. He deserved MVP, in my opinion, but I do think that, as you said, the biggest reason why the Philadelphia Eagles are now hoisting the Lombardi Trophy is the fact that they controlled that game from the outset. And so I think that when you consider how poorly Seattle was able to pass protect and create any type of movement in the running game, then the obvious solution here is to just, you know, kind of reallocate some assets and prioritize the offensive line. If that means making a splashy move in free agency, Trey Smith of those Kansas City Chiefs is going to be available, or could the Seattle decide to go with the more inexpensive route that John Schneider has prioritized in the past? That's what I have them doing with one of the biggest, certainly among the most physical offensive linemen that I've seen in this class. And so my selection for Seattle, number 18 overall, is going to be Armand Membo. This is a 6'4", 330-pounder who primarily played at the right tackle position at Missouri. However, because of a kind of a short, stubby frame, because he plays with such physicality, I do believe that he could slide inside and immediately start at the guard position. Laken Tomlinson at left guard. It might be the easiest fit for him because, again, this is a player that has the agility to be able to handle offensive tackle. While Membo has not played inside a guard at Missouri, at least not consistently, I do believe that he has the ability to be able to play that. And I talked about this before. Look, Charles Cross possibly has 2 more years on his contract should Seattle decide to bring him back for that 5th-year option. He, at this point, only has 1 more year. Same thing with Abraham Lucas, who, of course, is also struggling with durability questions. So I do think taking an offensive tackle who has some guard positional versatility would make an awful lot of sense. And a couple other things about Membo that, to me, just absolutely kind of check boxes for the Seahawks. For one, the SEC level of competition. For two, the fact that Missouri ran an awful lot of wide zone, which should be a nice fit in the new offensive coordinator's system, Clint Kubiak, of course, is scheme. And then finally, the fact that Armand Membo is just 21 years old. And so this is a very young player. We know that John Schneider has prioritized youth in the past. I think that he will in the 2025 first round as well.
Yeah, I'm going to stay in the trenches myself at pick number 18. Going with maybe a little different style player. I think Membo is a more fluid athlete than what Tyler Booker is. But look, if you watched Alabama games the last 2 years, you can't help but notice number 52. The guy is an absolute mauler. And, oh, by the way, didn't give up a single sack in the SEC this year. This guy is a fantastic pass protector. And I had my reservations when I went back to watch film in terms of Clint Kubiak's offense because this guy is 6'5". They list him at 325. If you watch the guy in the field, he looks like he's a lot bigger than 325 pounds. He is a massive human being. But while I'm not going to sit here and say he's a dancing bear, he's not the most laterally quick that you're going to find at the guard position in this draft class. What he does to compensate for that, he takes phenomenal angles technically when he gets to his reach blocks. And so to me, that is really the battle. There's some really good athletes that are not good zone blockers because they can't handle the targeting and being able to reach and taking the right angles. Tyler Booker is as good as anybody at doing that in college football. And so I watched more film and I thought, you know what? This is one of those guards. There's a reason he's going to go in the first round. You can put him in any system as far as I'm concerned. So I think you can plug him in. And there's been some big dudes who have had success playing in Clint Kubiak's system before. I think that Booker could come in day one and start for you at either guard spot. He has played snaps at both sides. He can start at either position. And if you pick him at 18, you expect he's going to play right away. And I still believe Christian Haynes can be a long-term starter. You could have those two on your offensive line and you get more physical while having the athletes to be able to guard or play zone block at the guard position. I really think that this kid, if he's there at 18, I don't know if he makes it there because he might be the best guard in this draft class. But if he's there at 18, I don't care if John Schneider has said that guards are overdrafted and overpaid. You have got to address the offensive line. And to me, this guy would be a home run selection there.
Well, and I love the fact that you just mentioned the fact that, again, Seattle obviously has to get some improved play along the offensive line. What I really like about these selections is the fact that these are players that, at least in my opinion, very much are first-round caliber players. Obviously, the level of competition that they faced in the SEC speaks for itself. The fact that Clint Kubiak had the success with a first-round offensive selection for offensive lineman a year ago. And the fact, of course, that he's bringing John Benton, who was the offensive line coach in New Orleans a year ago. They took Taliesin Fuaga, a player who had played primarily at the right tackle position, and he played an awful lot of snaps at left tackle for the Saints this past season. So you have an offensive coordinator as well as an offensive line coach who are going to do some coaching and are willing to just gamble on the athletic upside if the player is good enough. And in the case of Booker as well as Membo, and obviously with Fuaga this past season for the Saints, who I know in conversations with the Seahawks that had he been available to them, then maybe Taliesin Fuaga may have been a Seahawk. So again, this is a club that is looking for size, athletic ability along the offensive line, and all three of those players absolutely match that. So I just view this as a position of concern, obviously, for the Seahawks. But one of the reasons why I think that it is the strong favorite to be Seattle's selection. Again, offensive line is just because not only is this a position of concern for the Seahawks, it absolutely is the strongest position along this draft in this draft class, at least in my opinion. This is a meat and potatoes type of a draft. The best players likely to be available at number 18 overall are going to be offensive and defensive linemen. We know that's the way that John Schneider has always leaned anyways. That's the reason why this makes the most sense for the Seahawks at number 18.
We've still got 6 rounds to go in this dueling set of mock drafts. Always want to take the most time on first rounders, but championship teams are won on day 2 and day 3. We're going to get to Seattle's day 2 selections in our latest mock draft coming up next year on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Here's how it works. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's mock draft time. We'll have a few of these periodically leading up to the actual draft in late April. And we always like to do one right after the Super Bowl because, again, we get a picture of what the championship team had that allowed them to win. In the trenches, it's a tale as old as time. Winning in the trenches is critical to having a championship football team. Philadelphia Eagles were the best team in the trenches in the NFL all year long, so it's not a surprise that ended up being the difference in New Orleans last night. Let's get to our second and third round selections. You and I both picked offensive linemen in the first round. That does not mean we might not go that route again in round 2 or round 3, but let's talk pick number 50 in the second round. The Seahawks did not have a second round pick last year in the draft. This year, they do. And luckily, even though this is not the deepest draft class, there are some position groups where there should be some really good players that are available in the second round.
No question about it. And I think that this is a draft class that it's starting to almost become underrated because so many people out there, it's kind of throwing shade at this class. There's still some very good football players. It does not have the high-end skill position talent of what we saw a year ago. Of course, 6 quarterbacks going in the top 12. You have wide receivers going the late first round like Brian Thomas Jr. that winds up being arguably the most dynamic of last year's wide receiver class. I don't see that type of talent. However, I mentioned wide receiver because as I've talked about so many times on our show, Corbin, I just view wide receiver as being a key area of concern for the Seahawks. Now, it remains to be seen what Seattle is going to do with DK Metcalf. I still think the most likely scenario is number 14 remains in Seattle for an awful long time. And frankly, I think that he should. He is a talented player. And obviously, Jackson Smith-Njigba is an ascending star in his own right. However, I do believe that Seattle is more likely to be moving on from Tyler Lockett. And even if they bring Tyler Lockett back, and I think that they should consider it because of just who he is as a human being. At the same time, Seattle needs more production from a second or third wide receiver target. I think if there's 3 wide receivers that if they are available at number 50 overall, that Seattle has got to be paying very close attention. Another young player I mentioned before, I think that Seattle might be prioritizing youth. That is something that John Schneider has always done. Alec Ayomanor from Stanford, just 20 years old, redshirt sophomore from Stanford. A lot of people are absolutely sleeping on this kid because it's at Stanford. I mean, they don't churn out wide receivers nearly as consistently as they've churned out offensive linemen in the past. But you watch the tape of IU Manor, 6'2", 195 pounds. He's going to run well. He has got a long, graceful frame, and he just plucks the football as well as any wide receiver in this class. That is the player that I think that Seattle might prioritize at number 50. I'd also mention a player we talked about before from the Senior Bowl, Jack Besh from TCU, former LSU standout, as well as Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. I do think that Besh and Egbuka, if they are available at number 50, also would be in play, but I'm going to go with the younger athlete from the West Coast, who I do think is a player that people are sleeping on, that I think the Seahawks would absolutely prioritize because of his ability as a flanker position. I think that he could be a plug-and-play guy that, again, a lot of people don't know much about.
If Egbuka falls to 50, then I think that that's a home run pick. But I think he's gone in the first round, and he was gone in the mock draft that I did in the first round. This is a draft class that I think one of the positions that has more depth maybe than being advertised. We've talked about the offensive line. We've talked defensive tackles. But this edge rushing group, there's some really good players that could be first rounders in other drafts that might fall into round 2 because it is a deep position group. And we've talked about this ad nauseum since the season ended. I don't think that the Seahawks are necessarily set at the edge rusher spot at this point because we don't know what's going to happen with Draymond Jones or Uchenna Nwosu. We'll have an idea with Nwosu here by the end of this week because he's got a $6 million bonus coming up on Valentine's Day. And if the Seahawks haven't made a move before that, he's not going anywhere. But Boye Mafe is a free agent after this year. They've got some question marks at that position both now and next year. I think you take advantage of it, especially if somebody like Jack Sawyer is available at pick 50, and that's who I roll with. And look, Jack Sawyer, I don't know if he's going to test very well at the combine. He is not that super twitchy edge rusher. If you're looking for that kind of guy, that's not who Jack Sawyer is. However, this dude plays as hard as any guy in the country. Snap to snap, he is relentless. He wins with power. He has technician capabilities, and he is really good at turning the football over. This guy knows how to punch the ball out when he gets to the quarterback and the running back. And if the ball's on the ground, it just seems to find this kid. He had 2 fumble returns for touchdowns this year, and one of them was in that playoff game against Texas. So to me, Jack Sawyer is one of those guys at 260 pounds. He has played a little bit inside on passing downs because he's that physical. Mike McDonald would love this kid. I think he's a smaller, much cheaper, at least for now, version of Draymond Jones that, quite frankly, has more pass rushing upside than what Draymond Jones does. I think he'd be a really fun fit in this scheme. As for the third round, I ended up trading back a few spots to recoup a 2026 pick. We were allowed to make one trade apiece, and I know that you did one on day 3, but I made the trade down, and I still got the quarterback look. I know there's going to be some saying, why not just double up at Ohio State? Will Howard was available. I'm just higher on Kyle McCord at this point as an NFL prospect. And one of the reasons that I think Kyle McCord has a lot of similarities to Kirk Cousins in the way that he gets the ball out, the arm strength, the pocket presence improved a lot as his season at Syracuse went on. I just see a lot of Kirk Cousins' game. And, oh, by the way, Kirk Cousins, maybe the best seasons he ever had in his career were with Clint Kubiak, either as his quarterback coach or as offensive coordinator. And this is the other thing that jumps out. And listen, when I say this, I'm not making stuff up. I've watched every Syracuse game now because I love watching film on these quarterbacks, especially this class that had a lot of unknowns. He had a horrible game against Pittsburgh. He threw 5 picks and 3 of them were pick sixes. But when you have a game like that, what you want to see from a guy, how do you respond to that game? The last 6 games after that game, McCord threw 1 interception total, and he had 15 touchdown passes. He wasn't staring guys down near as much. He was actually going through his progressions. It's almost like he needed that really bad game to kind of fix some of the issues that have plagued him on his scouting report. And I think that he's underrated mobility-wise. He is not a dual threat, but I think he moves better than people think he does. And he's got at least enough mobility to be able to move around the pocket. And if he has to scramble, he can do some things. I don't think he's a statue, but I like the throwing attributes, and I like the improvements, reading progressions, and not staying on one receiver too long. I thought the last 6 games, we really saw this kid kind of have that come-to-earth type sequence of games where he was really playing good football. So I'm picking him in the 3rd round, and that's my guy that could be the heir apparent for Geno Smith.
No, I 100% agree with you. I think that Kyle McCord makes an awful lot of sense. I would be surprised if Seattle was able to trade back in the third round and Kyle McCord still be available to them. That said, because for all the reasons that you just talked about, the way that he finished the season, going up in a big time matchup against Miami's Cam Ward, beating him, going against Washington State in the bowl game and being absolutely spectacular in that performance. I mean, Kyle McCord's a terrific football player, and he is a guy that I think has starting potential in the NFL. So again, I would be surprised if he were still available deep into the third round. That's why I want to mention Kyle McCord. I want to mention Jackson Dart. I want to mention Jalen Monroe, the quarterback who I think might actually be available to Seattle that in the third round that I think is still a fit in Clint Kubiak's system is Quinn Ewers from Texas. And Corbin, you mentioned a moment ago with Jack Sawyer, another quality selection if he is available to Seattle at number 50 overall. Jack Sawyer, of course, knows Quint Ewers well. You referenced the fumble that he picked up and returned for a touchdown that basically broke Quinn Ewers and the Texas Longhorns' heart. At the same time, I see a lot of just grit and the accuracy in the short to intermediate game, a lot of the mobility that I think is a classic fit in the West Coast offense. Quinn Ewers is a smaller kind of a guy. He's got really slim shoulders. There's all kinds of physical detriments about him that are not going to push him up the board. He may not even be viewed as by some teams as a top 100 guy. I feel confident that Seattle does like Quinn Ewers a little bit more perhaps than some other clubs do. I absolutely think that he is a great fit in their system. And I just like the competitiveness. I mean, this is Quinn Ewers is the guy, of course, that is basically looking over his shoulder the entire time when Arch Manning signed at Texas, and he was able to beat Alabama on the road. He was able to, send Texas to the playoff and have an awful lot of success. I view Quinn Ewers as the guy who's going to surprise some people in the NFL. I do think this is the draft class that Seattle will take a quarterback. The fact that you and I both have them taking one in the third round here, I think was, again, just a kind of an acknowledgement of this club's history. Obviously, John Schneider having the success with Russell Wilson in the third round all those years ago. That is where I do expect Seattle to really start looking at this quarterbacks as opposed to, say, number 18 or number 50 in this year's draft.
Championship teams are built in all 7 rounds. We've still got rounds 4 through 7 to hit on our dueling mock drafts. We'll get to those coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player like Steph Curry to hit a clutch 3. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. In the offseason, there really isn't an offseason for the NFL, and that includes for the Locked On NFL podcast, which now is twice a day. Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans with your cup of morning NFL espresso, and then Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars dishing out the humor and the insight on episode number 2. 2 episodes of Locked On NFL every day. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast and make it your second listen after Locked On Seahawks. It's time to continue our dueling mock drafts, Rob. We are going to day 3, and again, this is really where teams find the players that are the difference makers between just being a playoff team or missing the playoffs and winning Super Bowls. We saw it last night. Philadelphia's got a number of players that chipped in. Moro Ojomo is one that immediately comes to mind. Had some really nice plays as a reserve defensive tackle. I know you and I both liked him coming out of Texas. Philadelphia got him in the 7th round. They've got several key contributors that they landed in late rounds that are on that football team that helped them win a Super Bowl. So without further ado, let's get to our day 3 selections. And the Seahawks actually have 6 picks on day 3. And I know that there is a certain player you decided to part ways with your last 6th round pick. There was a Senior Bowl standout. And look, this is a guy that I almost picked, and he was picked 2 picks before I was on the board. This is a kid that I know that you're really fired up about and a chance to continue improving Seattle's defensive line.
Well, yeah, for a lot of the same reasons you just talked about before with Jack Sawyer. It's the positional versatility, it's the production against quality competition, and it's the fact that, as you just mentioned, Seattle has prioritized Senior Bowl players before. I went with 2 very young players as 2 of the top 3 players. Even Quinn Ewers is an underclassman as well. So I thought, hey, get a guy who's a little bit older. Ty Robinson, the defensive lineman from Nebraska, is he's 24 years old. He's 6'5", 296 pounds. He plays primarily inside of the defensive tackle, but can move outside as the defensive end. He can even play on his 2 feet rather than with his hand in the ground. The fact that he wore number 9 this past season for Nebraska, that says a lot. Nebraska's head coach now is Matt Rule. A lot of listeners know that Matt Rule has prioritized the tough guys. They get a jersey number between 1 and 10. So this is the type of player that Seattle is prioritized. And I've been kind of pounding the table for a defensive lineman that gets his hands in the air. Interestingly enough, Ty Robinson has 12 passes broken up over his career. So to me, he makes some sense as far as that versatile defensive lineman, not only because of Draymond Jones, but Roy Robinson Harris. He is somebody who is a little bit up in the air. Jaron Reed as well. I want some size to be able to go inside. Kind of rapid fire here with another couple of picks. I talked about before what I consider to be a significant need for the Seahawks at the wide receiver position. Another wide receiver on the West Coast I don't think is getting enough attention is Ricky White III from UNLV.
Oh, yeah, good one.
Yeah, I mean, he is a guy that you just see his athletic ability. The fact that he was able to create big-time plays for a UNLV team that like to run the football more than anything, but this is a slick wide receiver that I really think could be very successful in a West Coast offense like the one that Clint Kubiak is going to be calling. I'll mention one other player real quickly here from the 6th round. So you talked about it, and I'll kind of listen to your comments and then bounce back with my last 2 picks. But Van Fillinger, defensive end / outside linebacker for the University of Utah. This is another guy that he's not the most dynamic athlete, kind of like we talked about before with Jack Sawyer. But Fillinger is a guy who is very, very physical. I think you can get him at a bargain basement price. We know that the Seahawks have invested a lot of selections in University of Utah players in the past. 6'4", 260 pounds. Fillinger is physical. He's instinctive. He's just to struggle a little bit with durability. He's not quite as agile. That's why he should be available in day 3. And I think somebody's going to get themselves a steal.
The pick of those 3, listen, I've talked about Robinson a ton. Obviously, he's the guy that I was hoping to get in my mock draft and came off the board a few picks before Seattle was up in the 4th round. I have loved that guy since the first game I saw him play this past season live. And it felt like every play number 9 was in on. He was doing something to disrupt the game, and he did that all year for Nebraska. But I like the Ricky White, the 3rd pick as well. He is a player that I actually think could maybe sneak into day 2 just because this is not a wide receiver group that I think has quite as much talent as we've seen the past few years. And White is a dude. I watch a lot of UNLV because I watch Boise State, and Boise State's my team. And I got to watch this guy a couple of times. The second time the 2 teams played, it was really cold, and UNLV just couldn't get the ball to him. But the first time these 2 teams played, he was killing Boise State with downfield plays. He can create after the catch. So Ricky White is a player that I really like. That being said, the receiver I got in the 4th round, I'm higher on than Ricky White III. And we talked a little bit about Nick Nash on an earlier episode. And what really fires me up about Nick Nash, the guy was a quarterback his first 3 years at San Jose State. He actually had a year he threw 6 touchdown passes, but he ran the ball a lot. He was a dual threat. You could see the playmaking ability. They had a few other quarterbacks they liked better. So let's try you out at receiver. His first year, I think he only had 6 catches his first season at receiver. Then the next year, he almost gets to 800 receiving yards. And then this year, he caught 16 touchdowns and over 1,300 receiving yards for San Jose State. He led the nation with 10 receiving touchdowns. of 20-plus yards through the air. So he was the most prolific deep ball threat in the entire country. He was one of the top yards after the catch producers in the country, in the top 10 in broken tackles forced, which isn't a surprise because he was a quarterback and that was part of his game, was running the football. This guy, I think, is going to stun people at the combine, at least people that don't know much about him. I could see him running in the high 4.3s at 6'3", 195. If you watch the tape, he's got those kind of wheels. Can you imagine that at quarterback? That's what when he was at QB, you watched the film for like 3 years ago. Some of the read option stuff was like, that would be really tricky to defend. But I like this kid a lot. He had some issues with drops this year, had 6 of them, but he caught most of the passes thrown his way. He's got deep ball capability, very high football IQ, and an excellent athlete. He's one I'm going to bookmark for the combine because I'm very interested to see what he ends up doing. A couple other picks that I made early on day 3. Joshua Farmer, I'm going to give this kid a lot of credit because a lot of players on Florida State's roster this year, if you watch Florida State, I mean, I don't know there's ever been a team that has collapsed the way they did after almost making the college football playoff the season prior. Joshua Farmer did not give in. He didn't quit. When you turn on the film, that was still a guy that was playing pedal to the metal every single snap. He had 26 pressures on quarterbacks this year. He contributed for 4.5 sacks at the defensive tackle position, and I think he's more of a nose in the NFL. This guy's a really good two-gapper. I think this might be a natural day 3 pick to replace Jonathan Hankins on your defensive line that has more pass rushing upside, at least when you look at what he's done at the college level. I don't know if that fully translates to the league, but at least on early downs, I see a kid that's got some ability as a run stuffer, and I'm intrigued by him in the 5th round. And the other selection early in the 6th, Noel Williams from California, led the country with 7 interceptions this year. So you may be sitting, why is he going to fall to the 6th round? Well, there were some big plays that were given up in coverage. He has had some susceptibility where his aggressiveness to the line of scrimmage has got the better of him. And I don't know that he is going to test quite as well as some of the other ball hawks that are in this class. When you watch on film, I see a guy that's more technically sound than being a elite athlete. But the other thing that I think fits Mike McDonald's defense, this dude will come up and hit you. He is a physical player. He likes to get off blocks. Only 3 missed tackles this year after he had 15 the year before. So he dramatically improved his tackling efficiency. This would be a kid I'd be really excited to see learn under Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon that has starter potential on the outside for the Seahawks.
Yeah, and I'm going to mention a corner as well that I'm very high on for a lot of the same reasons. Now, he physically is a much smaller man than Noel Williams from Cal, but Jabbar Muhammad, who a lot of Seahawks fans might be familiar with due to Muhammad being a star for Oregon this past season, as well as a star for the University of Washington the prior year. I mentioned both of those seasons because, you know, he led the Pac-12 in passes broken up 2 years ago, led the Big Ten in passes broken up this past season, was very productive at the cornerback position at Oklahoma State previous in his career. Now, he doesn't have the interceptions that Noel Williams has. That's one of the knocks on Jabbar Muhammad, the fact that he's 5'9", 185 pounds. He's going to be mostly a nickel corner after playing an awful lot on the outside at the college level. But at the same time, I just see instincts. I see a scrappy playing style. It reminds me a little bit of Artie Burns, who is a taller player than Jabbar Muhammad, but at the same time plays a similar type of a style. So at this late point in the draft, I have this at number 212 overall, the comp pick that the Seahawks are going to be receiving, at least is projected to receive for Bobby Wagner. To me, that would make an awful lot of sense. And then finally, to kind of wrap up this draft, look, I know that Seattle has some very talented running backs already on their roster, but at the same time, as we talked about, this is a running back class that is very, very good. And John Schneider has always prioritized that position. You go back over time and you look at all the different day 3 selections that the Seahawks have hit at the running back position. Chris Carson being an easy one, but DJ Dallas and Travis Homer and, you know, going all the way back to Alex Collins and obviously Kenny McIntosh currently on the roster. A lot of those guys were 7th round picks, almost all of them from massive programs that just guys that kind of fell through the crack and fell into your lap. I think that another player that might fit the bill would be Donovan Edwards from Michigan. again, University of Husky fans are not going to like this name reference because they might remember what Donovan Edwards did against the Huskies. But at the same time, I see a back that has almost some Rashad Penny-like size and straight line speed. And so if you give this guy a crease, he can go the distance. I don't know that he's going to run very well. This is a terrific running back class. There are going to be some talented running backs out there that should go third, fourth round that are going to be still waiting to be selected in the 6th or 7th. I would not be surprised at all to see John Schneider take one of them, even knowing that you have basically your entire stable of running backs already signed and ready for next season. Still, that is a position that there's just too many penalty or too much punishment that happens there. And that's one of the reasons why I think that Seattle will prioritize a running back late in 2025 again.
Unlike you, I did not package a couple picks to move up and get somebody. So I've still got 3 selections, and they're all players that I'm excited about for different reasons. At pick 196, Brandon Crenshaw-Dickson, the tackle from Florida. If this sounds familiar, Stone Forsythe, when he was coming out of Florida, was 6'8", about 320 pounds. Crenshaw-Dickson's 6'7", 320, and he previously played at San Diego State where he was a left tackle. He moved to right tackle for the Gators. Another player that had around a 98% pass blocking efficiency, and he was one of the top 10 zone blocking run blockers in college football, according to Pro Football Focus. And the tape matches up. This guy is a fluid mover, and really the difference between him and Stone Forsythe, you didn't see Forsythe necessarily finishing off blocks, and he was inconsistent with reach blocks. Crenshaw-Dickson he is fleet-footed for a guy his size, and he's really good at getting to his spot in the zone blocking game and getting guys sealed to create lanes, for running backs. I think this guy has the potential to maybe be a starter down the line. I think he still needs some refinement and maybe a little bit more work in the weight room. But this is a really good tackle class. There's going to be some good tackles that fall to mid-day 3. I think Crenshaw-Dickson is one of those guys that could go through the cracks a little bit. That would be a really good fit for this system. And my other 2 picks real quick, LeJounte Wester, the receiver from Colorado. If you know that name, he is a jitterbug. He maybe weighs 165 pounds soaking wet. The guy is not very big, but he is incredibly quick. He has the ability to win downfield. Didn't do it near as much for Colorado this year, but 2 years ago at Florida Atlantic was one of the top big play threats on deep balls in the country, and he's a dynamic kick and punt returner. Getting him at this spot would be really good value to add your special teams, and a guy that I think can also contribute on offense. And my last pick, I may butcher his last name, Brent, I believe it's Cuthie from Utah. Yeah. This is a guy that I have followed for a long time, and I'm bummed that I'm picking him at this spot because it's been injuries. The guy has had so many injuries. He missed all the 2023 season with an ACL injury. He had another significant injury in November this year. I don't know what injury he suffered. That was never reported by Utah, but he missed the rest of the season. So his health is going to weigh into this. But this guy had almost 250 rushing yards for Utah during his career. They've used him out of the backfield as a fullback. He has caught a ton of passes, over 100 receptions, 22 receiving touchdowns in his college career. He's got movability where he can play him in the slot, fullback, H-back. Not really an inline tight end. He's under 240 pounds. But I look at what Clint Kubiak's going to do with 2-back sets, and this guy screams fullback for Clint Kubiak. With his ability to catch the football, he can block out of the backfield. You can do a lot of really fun things with him. Kubiak's done a lot of 2-back sets in his career. They're going to need somebody they can do that with, and Cuthie is a guy that I think you can do that with as long as he's healthy. This is where you take a risk on a guy like that in the 7th round, and I think if this guy was healthy, he's probably picked a couple rounds earlier than that because he's a really good football player, but this could be a buy low, really high value selection in the 7th round. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to be tackling maybe the biggest question for the Seahawks going towards free agency. What is it going to cost to re-sign Ernest Jones? We're going to be breaking that all down on our Tuesday show. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Monday night. Go Hawks.